Alright, now I'm going to go and talk about the explosions. So the explosion, I have this. I was actually kind of excited for the explosions because I never knew that Teal had the last animation frame. And I ended up looking up to figure out what would be the best way to wait for the explosion to go through depending on how I have the animation set up. So yeah, so as soon as I spawn it, which I have a factory for it, and it's very closely related to how the bullet is, so it has its recycled items. And you can either create one or it makes uses a recycled one. But whenever it goes through its frames, then it marks itself for destroy and then destroys itself, and then the factory does its thing. We've already talked about the blaster and the inputs, so I'm going to go and talk about the player stuff and how the input is connected to the ship. So I have an enum class for input choice, either keyboard or AI, so then I can add more later if needed. And once again, I'm doing the inputs wrong because I am destroying them when I don't need them. So create inputs in the very beginning of initialize players, depending on how many I pick, because it could be I could have more than 2 players. I just don't have the score set up for them to show on the screen. So create input depending on what the choice is, so keyboard or AI. So basically, when the game starts, if it's the AI, it'll tell it the AI. It'll go through here and it'll do its thing, but then at the very end of it, if it's keyboard, it sets its choice to the keyboard to remember it for later, and then the instance for my input, the pointer to my input, I set it to whatever that chip is, and that's the same thing for AI. So then the input knows what it's looking at. But once again, once I go through, once I destroy a ship and I move it, or if I'm switching from keyboard to AI, I delete the previous one for the AI, because then I was getting an error because it was still reading it when it wasn't supposed to, so I need to go back and fix that after this class. Skipping the bullet because we've already talked about the bullet. I'm going to talk about the centipede. The centipede base and what I could do in the base could be a lot better because I have still a lot of stuff in the head and segments that don't need to be there since I have a base class. But I didn't really find time to go and do this. Most of the time what the base is used for is for the list, because literally my base is empty, which I know is a big no-no, especially since they're both reading from it. So there's not a reason not to be using it. I could be overriding, I override read movements and things like that, but nothing too spectacular. No. So then, yeah, we're going through here. And then for my head knows how many segments are going to be behind it, and that's how we set up these pointers. So when the head is created, it knows itself, and the new head is would have been for the split head when the head splits. The previous is null because it's the head, so it won't have anything in front of it. Initialize segments, depending on how many segments the wave controller tells it. So basically, if it's 3, it'll go through and it'll go through the segment factory, and it'll -1 segment and do this, and then the segment will make another one, and this is what the head's next pointer will be. So then if we go in here, and everything is off the centipede base since that's the base class. And we go and initialize. And then here is all this stuff that it needs to do, and then it also initializes segments. So then it keeps on going through this initialize segments, which this is something that I could put in my base because I'm reusing code. So I understand that I need to reuse it, I just was working on other things to get through it, so I understand that it's wrong. But so it keeps on going through until it's 0, and then when it does hit 0, then it will go and next equals an all pointer, so then that is the tail of that list. Then the head, I'm going to show that the head decides the movement. So I'm in my centipede head now. Let's see. And then depending on if it's like a solo head or it's a regular head, on its position on the map, that whether or not what state it's going to start at, and this is what it points to. So it's not copying the data, it's just pointing to the data. Then in my update, instead of having all those ifs, I have a total of 4 ifs now. Or, well, 3 ifs and then an else. So basically it goes through this update, and it does what it needs to do when it's pointing at the transform, and then it goes to the next one and reads the movement. It basically tells it what frame it needs to look at that data and do the exact same thing. So it's basically copying whatever the head's doing, and you go to the next counted frame. So this would be if we ended up moving the centipede faster, I would have to mess with these numbers, so then it would skip every other array so it could make up for the speed. And then it changes the frame. So if count of frames gets too high, so that means there will be no more moves on that array, so they're about to go off the array. Then you go to whatever the next you tell whatever the next segment state is, and also the state is changing anyways, so you're setting the next state to this. So then the segments always have something to read into. So then for read movement, we go in here, see in the base class it has nothing, but then in the segment for read movement, it has this. So basically it does, once again, it does the same thing. So I could have a function in the base class that does this. Although some of this stuff is a little different, so it'd probably be overrid. But it goes through here, and once again it does the exact same thing. It does what the head tells it to, and uses specifically what that data has at that position in the data. And then if there's no more data, then it sets it to whatever the next segment state is that the head has over here in its current state. So only the head decides where to move. And once again, it's only done once per game because it's done in the initialization in the very beginning. So if we go and start this up really quick, we'll go and X out of here now. But if we go in the very beginning, all these are initialized right in the very beginning. And then we have the mushrooms. Which also have their own factory. But like I showed before, the mushroom field has ways to hold the mushrooms, and then the mushroom factory works on the recycling and the creation, and then it also has the mushroom death. So then when they're destroyed, when mushrooms are destroyed, they're put in the recycling. And that's what the factory's for. And then implementation of normal to poison, I have a poison function. And then I don't actually have HP, I just changed the frame, so I moved the frame by 4. So then wherever it is on that sprite sheet that we got, I just move it down basically 1 row. So then even if it's getting shot, that if it gets poisoned before then, it just changes to that. So if we go and wait for a guy to spawn, so right now it's hurt, and then it looks perfectly fine and nothing changes to it.